Hold on a second. All right. Let me just check to make sure the streaming is working. Yes, we are live. All right. Excuse me. So today is a very special day. Let me just get this set up. Center the camera. Today is a very special day on the Vaishnav calendar, on the Vaishnav calendar. It is the Visvarupa Mahotsava, and it is also the day that Prabhupada took sannyasa. So I think we're going to be speaking about those two subject matters today. Visvarupa Mahotsava is the day that Visvarupa also took sannyasa, and I'm going to talk about who Visvarupa is. So because it's a sannyas day, we're going to chant this one song, Bhaja Hore Mana Sri Nandanandana, by Govindadas Kaviraj. So very, very important song. Okay, I'm not going to use the guitar for different reasons. Other days I'll use the guitar, but right now it's not appropriate for certain reasons. Anyway, don't worry about it. So, Bhaja Hore Mana Shri Nandanandana Abhaya Charanara Vindare Bhaja Hore Mana Shri Nandanandana Abhaya Charanara Vindare Nulaba Manava Janama Satsange Durlava Manava Janama Satsange Taro He Baba Sindure Taro He Baba Sindure Sita Hotpa Patabarijana Edina Jamani Jagire She talked about Vatabarijana Edina Jamani Jagire Pipale Sevenu Kripana Durajana Vipala Sevenu Kripana Durajana Chapala Sukalaba Lagire Chapala Sukalaba Lagire E Dona Jawana Putra Parijana Ite Kiache Pratiti Re E Dana Jumana Putra Parijana Ite Kiache Padatitre Kamala Dala Jala Jivana Talamala Kamala Dala Jala Jivana Talamala Vajahu Hari Padaniti Re Vajahu Hari Padaniti Re Shravana Kirtana Smarana Vandana Padasevnam Dashare Shravana Kirtana Smarana Vandana Padasevna Dashare Pujana Saki Jana Atmani Vedana Pujana Saki Jana Atmani Vedana Govinda Dasha Abhilasha Re Govinda Dasa Abhilasha Re Vashahure Mana Shri Nandanandana Abhaya Charanada Vindure Vashahure Mana Shri Nandanandana Abhaya Charanada Vindure. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Haribo, 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 Haribo. Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahansa Parabhidikacharya, also tell us that Shri Shrimad, His Divine Grace Abhaya Charanada Bhaktivedanta Goswami, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, ISKCON Founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Anandakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya, Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda Shidvaita Gadadha, Shiva Siddhi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna, Gopi Gopinath, Sai Mukunda, Radhakunda, Kiri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavanam Ki Jai, Mathuram Ki Jai, Jagadata Sami Ki Jai, Munamai Ki Jai, Shrimati Lasadevi Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Go Premananda Hari Hari Bo. All glory is the assembled devotees, all glory is the assembled devotees, all glory is the assembled devotees, all glory is to Shri Guru and Gauranga, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nama Om Vishnupadaya, Krishna Prastaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swamiti Namani Namaste, Saraswati Devi, Gauravani Pacharani, Nivashesha Shunyavadi, Paschatya Deja Tarani. So, as I mentioned before, today is the glorious day that Srila Prabhupada took sannyas. It's called Visvarupa Mahotsava, and it's also the day that Visvarupa, the elder brother of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, took sannyas. So, let me just set the chat window up here so I can see if anyone has any comments while I'm speaking. Okay, so let's talk about Visvarupa very shortly. So, Om Ganat Timidanda Shah, Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshur Unmeditam Yena Tasmai Shigurave Namaha. So, Lord Chaitanya's appearance was very similar to Krishna's appearance in Mathura. Actually, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master's divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who so kindly opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge while I was blinded completely in the darkness of ignorance. So, then Lord Chaitanya's appearance is very similar to the appearance of Sri Krishna, which took place approximately 4,500 years before Lord Chaitanya was born. So here's a little bit of interesting information. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mother, before she gave birth to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, she had 8 daughters. And of course there was no Kamsa around to kill her daughters, but they died one after another immediately after birth. Now I'm sure that there's some inside story about that, how, either they were cursed or they didn't want to take birth on the earth planet for a long time. I don't know the inside story, perhaps someone does, but anyway. So immediately after birth, they passed away, the daughters. And then she was pregnant for the 9th time, and she gave birth to a son, who she named, Visvarupa. And Visvarupa is considered to be Balaram, an incarnation of Balaram. This is very, very interesting. So it's also described that when Visvarupa passed away, he entered into Nityananda. Exactly what that means, entered into, just take it as an article of faith. So anyway, so interesting story. Visvarupa would always associate with Advaitacharya and hear Krishna Katha from Advaitacharya. So what happened is that he was hearing this Krishna Katha all the time. I mean, at least this is the external reason, not the internal reason. He was hearing this Krishna Katha all the time, and as a result, he became detached. So much detached. Of course, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would sometimes join. He was just a little boy at that particular point. But he would sometimes join at Advaitacharya's house to hear this Krishna Katha. There's some stories that when Advaitacharya and the others saw Lord Chaitanya, they became overwhelmed with his beauty, seeing his beauty. So Visvarupa heard all this spiritual knowledge. Then one day, he was actually listening through the door or the wall while his parents, Sachimata and Jagannath Mishra, were discussing his marriage. And so he became very, very upset. And so what happened is he headed for the hills. He took sannyas, left in the middle of the night. And Sachimata and Jagannath Mishra were very, very upset. Very, very upset. Lord Chaitanya, after that, he's told them, don't worry, I'll stay with you. But in any case, they were so upset that Jagannath Mishra would not let Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu continue his education because he was afraid if Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu found out too much about this material world, he would take sannyas. Actually, I didn't read the translation. Let me read the translation of this poem, because this is very much in line with what we're talking about. O mind, just worship the lotus feet of the son of Nanda, which makes one fearless. Having obtained this rare human birth, cross over the ocean of worldly existence by associating with saintly persons. Day and night I remain sleepless, suffering heat and cold, wind and rain. For a bit of flickering happiness I have vainly served wicked and miserly men. What assurance of real happiness is there in all one's wealth, youth, sons, and relatives? This life totters like a drop of water on a lotus petal. Therefore you should always worship the lotus feet of Lord Hari. Govindadas longs to hear the glories of Lord Hari, to chant his glories. Constantly remember him, offer him prayers, serve his lotus feet, become his servant, worship him, serve him as a friend, and completely offer him his very self. So Govindadas's statement here, that it's like a drop of water or a lotus leaf, which means at any minute the drop of water, because the lotus leaf has a waxy covering, can fall off. And that's like this life. At any minute, unexpected, when you're going to pass away. Like when one time Prabhupada was talking to a reporter, and Prabhupada was asked a question about she said, basically said, why so many young people? And of course Prabhupada also answered, the youth is the time for education, because you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And Prabhupada said something like, how do you know that you're not older than me? And she was a young girl, and Prabhupada was over 70. And she got bewildered, and Prabhupada said, old age means how close you are to death, so you never know who's close to death and who's far away from death, but ultimately it will come. So one has to take advantage of every moment, and that's one of the qualities of Vaishnava. Doesn't waste any time. Anyway, so let's go back to Visvarupa. So Visvarupa just headed out. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not allowed to get any schooling. Eventually he convinced his parents that he should go back to school when he sat on a whole bunch of rejected cooking pots that his parents thought were improper. And then he just said, how do you expect me to understand what's proper or contaminated and what's not contaminated unless you send me some education, send me to school. Oh, say, okay. So Visvarupa, his sannyasa name was Shankaranya. And he passed away ultimately in a place called Pandapura, which Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu found out about during his tour of South India. So, anyway. So that's Visvarupa, as I mentioned before. He entered into Lord Nityananda, because Visvarupa and Lord Nityananda, they're non-different. So they're expansions or both incarnations of Balaram or Baladev as we know it. So today is Visvarupa Mahotsava. So in addition to being Visvarupa Mahotsava, for us in the Krishna Conscious Movement, another very important thing that occurred today was the taking of sannyas by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. So what I would like to do right now is, if that's all right, read from the Prabhupada Lilamrita a short passage about Srila Prabhupada's taking sannyas. And I guess I will comment a little bit as we read this short passage about Prabhupada's taking sannyas, or what happened before Prabhupada took sannyas, and then what happened when Prabhupada took sannyas. Okay, so let us share the screen. All right. Whoops. I wonder what screen it's on. So Windows. I know I have it open somewhere. Visvarupa. Let me just see. Yes, I have it opened. Hold on a second. I had prepared for this class. Let's see. Visvarupa. Okay. Oh, yeah, I see. I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. Here's the story. So before Prabhupada, let me put up the chat window so I can see if there's, usually like to keep it open to see if there's any problems with people hearing things or whatever. Before Prabhupada took sannyas, he had approached many of his godbrothers to either give him sannyas or allow him to sponsor his travel to the Western world, but they basically just wanted to placate him. As we're going to read here, of course Prabhupada at that time was known as Abhaya Charanadavinda. So let's continue. Abhaya could understand the needs and priorities of the Chaitanya Math, but he could not allow them to overrule what he considered the highest mandate, preaching as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had ordered. Abhaya had offered his services to the leaders of the Chaitanya Math, thinking they might also see things his way. He thought that with the world's crying need for Krishna consciousness staring them in the face, they might see that this Abhay Babu was convinced and enthusiastic and should be sent right away with whatever he required. but they had other priorities. I'm not going to get into criticizing Prabhupada's godbrothers, but Prabhupada was the one who took to his heart and soul the order of his spiritual master more than any other devotees who had gotten that order. I mean, obviously, some of the devotees had not gotten that order because they didn't know English or whatever. But amongst those who actually got that order, so Abai next turned to Keshava Maharaj in Mathura, and Keshava Maharaj told Abai to take sannyas immediately. After corresponding with Tirtha Maharaj, Abai had felt some uncertainty about accepting sannyas, because Tirtha Maharaj said, just take your time, just be patient. And he actually discouraged Prabhupada. He said to Prabhupada that most of the preaching in the Western world nowadays is done through television and radio, or most of the communication, so it's not necessary to go there physically. Abai had felt some uncertainty about accepting sannyas, and now that he has been encouraged so strongly, he resisted. But Keshava Maharaj was insistent. And actually Prabhupada had gotten 2 dreams before, where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came to him in the middle of the night, and that's when the dream usually occurs, and he was beckoning to him, take sannyas, come with me. But Prabhupada, being very responsible, he said that he felt horrified. But Prabhupada's wife actually helped, let's say, inspire Prabhupada to take sannyas. Not that she wanted Prabhupada to take sannyas, but there's that whole story about Prabhupada finding his Bhagavatam had been sold for what? Tea biscuits. And Prabhupada got really angry. Imagine selling someone's Bhagavatam for tea biscuits. And then there's that whole story about how Prabhupada said to his wife, who was addicted to drinking tea, you either give up tea or give up me. Tea or me, as Prabhupada put it. And she said, I'd rather have tea than you. So, of course, she was probably joking, but Prabhupada took that very seriously. Then his business went bankrupt. So many things happened. So there is a background story to Prabhupada taking sannyas. Also, Prabhupada had attempted to preach in Jhansi, and that project was taken away from him. And so he understood sannyas means a complete, utter, absolute dedication to the order of the spiritual master. Actually, the word sannyas is composed of 3 syllables, sannyasa. But actually 2 words, sang, yasa. It means accepting. There's different ways to analyze this word. San means to accept something, and nyasa means to reject. So sometimes a Mayavadi sannyasi is called a nyasi. Nyasi means someone who just rejects. But a Vaishnava sannyasi is a sannyasi because he's accepting everything favorable for serving Krishna and rejecting everything unfavorable. So that's what Prabhupada was thinking at that particular point. Of course, later on, Prabhupada employed grahastas in doing the most amazing preaching that even Prabhupada's godbrothers couldn't do, especially when he sent the group of devotees headed by Shamashundra to London, and they were extremely successful, and then the whole Europe was opened up by grahastas. So, but at that particular point, the culture was that if someone wanted to be respected, especially in India, you have to be a sannyasi. In America, it doesn't really make a difference. You can be a sannyasi, a brahmachari, whatever. I mean, obviously, if you have the word Swami, it sort of sounds cool, and people will respect you. But in America, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I mean, you can be a man, you can be a lady, you can be a little baby, I mean, whatever it is. So, but this was traditional culture. So Prabhupada said, I was sitting alone in Vrindavan writing. My godbrother insisted to me, Bhaktivedanta Swami, you must do it. I think he was sitting in the Vamshi Gopal temple, which is the first place Prabhupada resided in Vrindavan, before he resided in the Radha Damodar temple. Without accepting the renounced order of life, no one can become a preacher. So he insisted, practically, my spiritual master insisted. He wanted me to become a preacher. So he forced me through this godbrother. You accept. So unwillingly, I accepted it. Wow. Unwillingly. Actually, it was willing, but... Prabhupada was responsible. One may say, why wasn't he more enthusiastic? Because Prabhupada wasn't responsible. He wasn't going to do anything irresponsibly. I was just listening to a Prabhupada memory the other day, where Prabhupada was sitting in Mayapur, and he heard that his previous wife and daughter were getting kicked out of their house because there was some family dispute, that always happens in Bengal, family disputes. So they were getting kicked out of their house, and Prabhupada sent a message to them. You can come and live in Mayapur for the rest of your life if you want. And some devotees said to Prabhupada, but Prabhupada, you're sannyasi, how can you have your previous wife live in Mayapur? And Prabhupada said, you're right, but this is an emergency situation. So a Vaishnava is always compassionate. It's not that he's like a Mayavadi. If he sees someone suffering. And Prabhupada, actually I was listening to another memory where Prabhupada was bragging about the devotees in Melbourne. In Melbourne, the devotees were preparing for Rath Yatra, and as they were preparing for Rath Yatra, there was a fire in a nearby building. And there were some ladies who were out of the balcony, in second floor, third floor, whatever it was. And they were in danger. They couldn't get out. And the devotees grabbed, what did they grab? The canopy for the Rath Yatra cart, and held that canopy. And by holding that canopy, they said to the lady, jump, jump. And she jumped. And she was saved because of the devotees. So that hit the news that particular day. And Prabhupada was very proud of that. The devotees should always be compassionate. It's not that we think, oh, well, they're just karmis. We should feel compassion and want to help if we're able to help without sacrificing our Krishna consciousness. So here's a description of the place where Prabhupada took sannyas. Keshavaji, Gaudiya was located in the midst of one of Mathura's downtown bazaars. Its main entrance, an arched doorway, led into a courtyard open to the sky through a metal grating above. The architecture was similar to that of the Vamshi Gopalji temple. That's where I said Prabhupada was staying at that time. The atmosphere was secluded as in a monastery. Abai was a familiar, welcome figure here. He had lived here, written and studied in the library here, edited the Gaudiya Patrika, it's a newspaper, and donated the deity of Lord Chaitanya who stood on the altar beside the deities of Radha and Krishna, Shri Radha Vinoda Viharaji. But his visit during September 1959 was not an ordinary one. He entered the mat dressed in white, Abai Babu, but he would soon be leaving dressed in saffron, a Swami. Abai had been living as a renunciate for 9 years, but renunciate means vanaprastha. He wasn't living with his family at this particular point. So he had actually renounced his family. But still, he felt some responsibility. As I mentioned before, even after taking sannyas, Prabhupada felt some responsibility. Even when Prabhupada left the planet in his will, he left a stipend, a trust fund, for his family. There was no need for him to observe a ceremony or proclaim himself a sadhu by changing to saffron dress, but it was the parampara system that a man take Tridandi sannyas at the end of his life. He was aware of the cheating sannyasis. Even in Vrindavan, he had seen so-called sadhus who did not preach, but simply spent their days hunting for japatis. Some swamis of Vrindavan even indulged illicitly in what they had supposedly come here to reject, sex life. Such persons were making a mockery of sannyas. And of course, there's that whole story where there was some controversy as to who would get Gorkashordas Babaji Maharaj's transcendental body after Gorkashordas Babaji Maharaj left this world. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was the only disciple of Gorkashordas Babaji Maharaj, but the sannyasis, so-called sannyasis, did not want to allow him to have that body because that would be a big draw for the tourists. A big draw for the tourists. And it's, very, very interesting. I'll mention another point in a second. So they didn't want him to have the transcendental body there. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, all right, if anyone has not had illicit sex for a month, he can have the body. Then he went to fortnight, which is 2 weeks, then a few days, and they all slunk away. So, many cheaters in the name of religion. In the Western world, too. We do not have a monopoly on cheating in India. Everywhere there are people who are cheating. And there were the caste Goswamis also who lived like ordinary householders, running temples as a business to support their families and accepting honor and donations from the public on the false basis of birth. Abai knew of these abuses of sannyas, but he also knew the real purpose of sannyas. Sannyas was for what? Preaching. That's the point, because actually in Kali Yuga, according to the Vedic literatures, sannyas is prohibited. And the only time it can be accepted if it's for preaching Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, what is the need for sannyas? There's no need, because one can be renounced in any situation. On the morning of September 17th, 1959, of course, we are talking right now of the Western calendar day, but today is the moon calendar day, the Visvarupa Mahotsava, which Srila Prabhupada took sannyasa on. In the 50 by 25 foot deity room on the second floor of the Keshavaji Math, a group of devotees sat before the deities of Radha, Krishna, and Lord Chaitanya. The deities were colorfully dressed in royal clothing and silver crowns. Radharani's right hand faced palm forward in benediction for the worshipper. At her side, her left hand held a flower for Krishna. Krishna stood like a dancer, placing his right leg in a casual tiptoe pose before his left, playing his long silver flute, which he held gracefully to his red lips. His long black hair reached down past his shoulders, and the garland of marigolds around his neck reached down to his knees. On his right stood the deity of Lord Chaitanya, his right arm raised, left arm at his side, his body straight, feet together. He was a soft golden color, and he had large eyes, well-formed red mouth, and straight black hair down to his shoulders. One level below the deities were pictures of the spiritual masters in disciplic succession: Jagannath Das Babaji, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Gorkashore Das Babaji, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and Bhakti Pagyana Keshava Maharaj. Abai sat on a mat of kusha grass beside 90-year-old Sanatana, who was also to receive sannyas that day. Sitting opposite the two candidates, Narayan Maharaj, Keshava Maharaj's disciple, prepared to conduct the ceremony of mantras and offerings of grains and ghee into the fire. Akinchana Krishna Das Babaji, Abai's godbrother, known for sweet singing, played mridanga and sang Vaishnava bhajans. Sitting on a raised asana, His Holiness Keshava Maharaj presided. Since there had been no notices or invitations, only the Math's few residents attended. So Prabhupada was very intimate with Krishnadas Babaji, who was the only Babaji disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and very close to Srila Prabhupada. He would come to see Prabhupada before Prabhupada passed away in Vrindavan. He came to see Prabhupada in Mayapur, and he was always very jolly, just chanting the holy names. And if the devotees asked him any question, even after Prabhupada left this world, he would just laugh and chant Hare Krishna at them. So that's ideal Babaji life. Babaji life means what? A Paramahansa. So in the Paramahansa mode, one doesn't preach that much. One actually just is absorbed in his internal life, his or her internal life. But sometimes the Paramahansa steps down to emulate a Madhyamadikari, and he steps down out of compassion, like Srila Prabhupada, because a Madhyamadikari preaches and he makes distinction between devotees and non-devotees and the innocent and the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the envious. Narayan Maharaj chanted the required mantras and then sat back silently while Keshava Maharaj lectured. Then, to everyone's surprise, Keshava Maharaj asked Abhaya to speak. Abhaya had not expected this. As he looked around at the gathering of devotees, he understood the common language was Hindi. Only Keshava Maharaj and a few others spoke English. Yet he knew he must speak in English. Wow. I wish we had a recording of that or transcription of that speech. We don't. After Abhaya's speech, each initiate received a sannyas danda, the traditional head-high staff made of 4 bamboo rods bound together and completely wrapped in saffron cloth. So there's actually, it's called a tree danda because the body, mind, and words are dedicated to Krishna, and the soul is the 4th danda. It's 4 bamboo rods. Anyway, I was actually given one too. They were given their sannyas garments, 1 piece of saffron cloth for a dhoti, 1 for a top piece, and 2 strips for underwear. They also received tulsi neck beads and the sannyas mantra, which I'm not going to give you. Keshava Maharaj said that Abhay would now be known as Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj and Sanatan would be Muni Maharaj. After the ceremony, the 2 new sannyasis posed for a photo, standing on either side of their sannyas guru, who sat on a chair. Let's see if I can find that photo. Hold on a second. Prabhupada. Taking sannyas. Sometimes with Google is easier to find things than, yeah, I found it. It's easier to find things with Google than it is in the database. Okay, let me just share that for a second. Hold on, let me make it bigger so everyone can see it. Alright, wait a second. Whoop. There we go. I mean, it's not such a great picture, but let me just share it for a second. And then we'll go back. That's amazing that we have this picture of Prabhupada taking sannyas. I think everybody could see it. Because Muni Maharaj and Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada, and Keshava Maharaj sitting down. Okay. Sorry if the quality is not that good. Let's go back to the text that I was just reading. All right. Where are we? Okay. Here we go. Keshava Maharaj didn't pose any strictures on Abhay, in other words, no instructions. He simply encouraged him to go on preaching. Yet Abhay knew that to become A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami did not mean merely that he's giving up his family, home comforts, and business. He had already done that 5 years ago. Changing from white cloth to saffron cloth, from Abhay Babu to Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, had a special significance. It was the mandate he had required, the irrevocable commitment. Now it was only the matter of time before Bhaktivedanta Swami would travel to the west, as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had ordained. This was Bhaktivedanta Swami's realization of his new sannyas status. So, of course, in sannyas, you're taking a vow. And the vow is just like, well, Sharanagati, basically. Basically, what? Number 1, to accept everything favorable for preaching, Krishna conscious. 2, to reject everything unfavorable. 3, to always understand the Lord as maintaining one. 4, to always understand the Lord as protecting one. 5, to sometimes 5 and 6 are switched. to be, to have no separate interest other than the interest of the Lord, and, so that's 7. And 8, to be meek and humble. And that's the hardest one for me, being meek and humble. Let me just put this in the chat window back there again so I can see. So, the Gaudiya Patrika's account of the sannyas initiation included a biographical sketch of Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, listing the major events of his life. The article concluded, seeing his enthusiasm and ability to write articles in Hindi, English, and Bengali, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj gave him the instruction to take Tridandi sannyas. For nearly 1 year, he had been ready to accept sannyas. From the founder of the Vedanta Samiti, skipped ahead. In the month of Bhadra, on a day on which Visvarupa accepted sannyas, Bhaktivedanta Swami at the Sri Keshavaji Gaudiya Math accepted sannyas from, let's keep skipping, from the founder of the Vedanta Samiti, Prakti Pragyana Keshava Maharaj. Seeing him accept his ashram of renunciation, seeing this pastime for accepting the renounced order of life, we have attained great affection and enthusiasm. Yes, that's the end of Prabhupada's taking sannyas. So, actually, here, we'll just read a little bit more and then we'll take questions. Bhaktivedanta, and then tomorrow we'll go to Krishna book again. Bhaktivedanta Swami, accompanied by some of the Keshavaji Gaudiya Math's devotees, made a short preaching tour of Agra, Kanpur, Jhansi, and Delhi. But he was soon back in his own place at the Vamsi Gopalji temple. It's a beautiful temple. It's just like in a corner right on near the Yamuna River. I've been there. And Prabhupada's quarters were very sparse. I mean, in these temples, there was no bathroom or anything. So every morning and any other time they had to go to the bathroom, they had to walk out on the sandy bank, which is right next to the Jamuna, with a lota and take care of themselves. Very, very primitive. You know, you think of Prabhupada staying in a temple, all right, there was a bathroom, there was a kitchen. I mean, in Prabhupada's quarters at the Radha Damodar temple, which I assume were similar to the quarters that he had at the Vamsi Gopalji temple, Prabhupada just had a little tiny cooker. And somehow or other, he was able to wash things, clean the pots and everything like that. And, well, he had a multi-tiered cooker, which he was able to cook so many preparations simultaneously. But still, it's very difficult. No running water, no sinks, no bathrooms. Just very, 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 very simple. How many of us could actually live like that? Actually, Prabhupada wanted us to have better facility because he understood those of us from the Western world, and actually most of the people from India now, were accustomed to a more comfortable way of life. But Prabhupada was engaged in really heavy austerities even before he took sannyas, just living like that. And Prabhupada got gored by a bull at one particular time when he was trying to preach Krishna consciousness and distribute his Back to Godhead magazines. Got rejected by people. I mean, and he was all alone. He had no one to just like encourage him, except for Krishna. And of course, there's stories when he was in the Radha Damodar temple, that Prabhupada would sometimes be heard from the neighboring temple crying, and Prabhupada commented one time that he was communicating with Srila Rupa Goswami. Of course, the Radha Damodar temple was the headquarters of the Goswamis of Vrindavan. They would meet there regularly to discuss their literatures and discuss Krishna Katha, and they would take prasadam there together. But he was soon back at his own place in the Vamsi Gopalji temple. No one called him Abhay Babu any longer, even amongst friends. It was Swamiji or Maharaj. And people often addressed him as Swami Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. It's a long title. People readily recognized him as a sadhu and offered respect. Yet his basic problems remained. He wanted to write and print, but he had no money. He wanted to broadcast the message of Godhead, but few were willing to listen. Such things hadn't been changed by his becoming a Swami. When a librarian advised Bhaktivedanta Swami to write books, they were permanent, whereas newspapers are read once and thrown away. He took it that his spiritual master was speaking through this person. And that's very interesting that Yo mam pashati sarvatra sarvam chumami pashati tashaham na pranashami zacha me na pranashati. That one should actually see, even when sometimes when an ordinary materialist is speaking to you, of course you don't take everything they say as the absolute truth, but one should see that Krishna is communicating something to you. Mm. And so Prabhupada took it like that. Then an Indian army officer who liked back to Godhead suggested the same thing. Bhaktivedanta Swami took it as a revelation from his spiritual master, as a dependent servant constantly meditating on the desires of his transcendental master and seeking his guidance. Bhaktivedanta Swami felt his spiritual master's reciprocal blessings and personal presence. More and more he was feeling confidential contact with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and now he was feeling an inspiration to write books. And it's also important because today's the Bhadra, starting the Bhadra month or something like that. Anyway, they were having this marathon called the Bhadra Purnima Marathon. He considered Srimad Bhagavatam because it was the most important and authoritative Vaishnava literature. Although Bhagavad Gita was the essence of all Vedic knowledge presented in a brief ABC fashion, Srimad Bhagavatam was elaborate, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur had both written Bengali commentaries on the Bhagavatam. In fact, most of the great Vaishnavacharyas of the past had commented on Srimad Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself had recommended Srimad Bhagavatam as the spotless Vedic literature, and English translation and commentary for this book could one day change the hearts of the entire world, like we're seeing. And if he could publish even a few books, his preaching would be enhanced. He could go abroad with confidence and not appear empty-handed. Also, his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, before he sent his disciples overseas, he published a book about Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we understood you had to have some books to show people. You couldn't just go there without books. And Prabhupada's strategy was successful. And so then in the next paragraph it describes Gaurachand Goswami, proprietor of the Radha Damodar temple, approached Bhaktivedanta Swami, inviting him to come live at the Radha Damodar temple, being the eternal home of Jiva Goswami and Rupa Goswami. It would be more suitable for his writing and translating. Bhaktivedanta Swami was interested. He had never stopped his regular visits there, and he always felt inspired in the presence of the Samadhi tombs of the great leaders of Lord Chaitanya's movement, Jiva Goswami and Rupa Goswami. But when he went to look at the two available rooms, he found them in poor repair. They had not been maintained or lived in for many years. Not wanting to miss the opportunity, however, Bhaktivedanta Swami agreed to take the rooms at 5 rupees per month. He estimated that for a little more than 500 rupees he could have electricity installed and extensive repairs made, and when it was finished, he could move in. So we're going to end our reading right now, and then we will allow you a few minutes to ask questions, either in the chat window or by raising your hand or allowing you to unmute yourselves. Okay, who has a question? No one has a question.
Gurudev, please accept my humble obeisances.
Okay, one question, quick question.
What does the word Sharanagati mean?
Sharanagati means to go and surrender. Sharanagati, gati, the path of surrender. That's what it means. Like, Mamekam Sharanam Braja. You know, like in the Bhagavad Gita 1866. Sarvadharmam Parichaja Mamekam Sharanam Braja. Just do it. Go there. Do it. So it means the path of surrender, path of going there. Okay? Sharanam means someone who is surrendered. Very, very nice question. Okay, yeah, you just get one question. And Cole, you have a question. Good to see you. Why don't you unmute yourself?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay, please accept my humble obeisances. I just had a question.
Okay.
When Krishna appeared on Earth in the Dwapara Yuga or the Dwarupa Yuga,
Yeah.
was that actually like the full expansion of him? Like, was he
That,
still in Golaka Vrindavan when he
yeah.
came
Well,
down?
yeah. Good question. Like Krishna, yes, that was fully Krishna. There wasn't an expansion, anything less than Krishna. It's not like Lord Narayan or anything like that. But Krishna also was in Vrindavan at the same time. I'm Goloka Vrindavan, sorry, which is your question, because Krishna never leaves Goloka Vrindavan. So Krishna, in his original aspect, can be in unlimited places simultaneously. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great question. Thank you, Cole. So, who else has a question? Raise your little hand or big hand and or type in the chat window. If not, we can end. Uh, shouldn't be a problem to end a little early. Okay, thank you very much. We'll hopefully see everybody tomorrow, same time, same station. All glories to His Divine